Amid a glamorous event, a pregnant woman witnesses her husband humiliating her before a silent crowd. What begins as a public scandal turns into an unrelenting downfall when her father decides to act with ruthless justice. But it is in this woman's quiet rebuilding that the true twist is born. The alarm clock rang at 5 in the morning, but Marianne had already been awake for at least an hour. Sitting on the balcony of her small apartment in the neighborhood of the Lanes in Brighton, she watched the first lights of dawn paint the sky orange and pink. The sea breeze carried the smell of salt, mixed with the aroma of coffee coming from her neighbor's kitchen. Her fingers drummed nervously on the empty cup she had been holding for so long that the coffee had already completely cooled. Today was the day. After 3 years working as an assistant at the city's most prestigious art gallery, she would finally have the chance to exhibit her own paintings. The gallery owner, Mr. Augustus, a grey-haired gentleman with an always wary gaze, had agreed to give an opportunity to emerging local artists. Marianne had been one of 5 selected from over 200 applications. She got up and walked to the small makeshift studio in the apartment's 2nd bedroom. The canvases were lined up against the wall, each one representing a piece of her soul. They were urban landscapes of Brighton, but not the typical postcards. Marianne painted the city she truly knew, the one that woke up early, that sweated under the scorching sun, that danced even when her body ached from fatigue. Her brush strokes captured the street vendors, the washerwomen, the street musicians, the children playing ball in narrow alleys. She delicately touched the largest canvas, the one she considered her masterpiece. It depicted a woman with her back to the viewer, looking out at the sea, but it was more than just that. There were layers of textures, colors that blended almost imperceptibly, creating a sense of movement and depth that seemed to make the figure breathe. That woman was her mother, Mrs. Constance, though few would recognize it just by looking. Her phone vibrated in her bathrobe pocket. It was a message from Raphael, her best friend since art school. He had moved to London 2 years ago, pursuing the dream of working in big advertising agencies, but he kept in daily contact with Marianne. "You're going to ace it today, Mary. Did you send all the photos of the canvases I asked for?" Marianne smiled. Raphael had always been her biggest supporter, even when she herself doubted her own talent. She typed a quick reply and looked back at the canvases. She needed to choose which one would be the first to be hung on the gallery wall. Mr. Augustus had been clear. The order mattered, as it would determine the visitor's first impression of her work. By 7 o'clock she was ready. She put on simple jeans, a white cotton blouse and flat sandals. Nothing too elaborate. She had learned that in the gallery, the attention should be on the artworks, not the artists. She tied her long, curly hair into a loose bun, grabbed the keys to her older sister Julia's borrowed car and left. Traffic was surprisingly light for a Saturday morning. Marianne turned on the radio and let the music calm her as she drove through the still sleepy streets of the city. She passed by the Old Stein, circled the Royal Pavilion estate and finally arrived in Brunswick Town, an upscale neighborhood where the Horizon Gallery was located. The establishment was imposing, a renovated historic building with a white facade and tall wooden windows painted blue. Mr. Augustus was at the door, supervising the entry of more boxes with works by other artists. When he saw Marianne, he waved with a discreet smile. "Good morning, Marianne. Have your canvases arrived?" "They're in the car, Mr. Augustus. I'll get them now." As she carefully unloaded each wrapped painting, Marianne noticed a tall man watching from across the street. He wore sunglasses even though the sun wasn't strong yet, and held a professional camera. For a moment their gazes met, and he smiled before returning his attention to his equipment. "Who's that?" Marianne asked Mr. Augustus when she returned to get the last canvas. "Ah, that's Thomas Miller, a photographer, a very good one, by the way. He's doing a feature on Sussex contemporary art for a national magazine. He asked to document our exhibition." Marianne felt a chill in her stomach. A national magazine meant visibility. It meant her work could be seen by curators, collectors, and art critics from all over the country. She tried not to dwell on it, and focused on moving her artworks into the gallery. The interior space was even more impressive than the facade. Soaring white walls, strategic lighting, wooden floors that creaked softly underfoot. There were at least 20 people working on the setup, each responsible for a specific task. Marianne was directed to the left wing, where she would have an entire wall to herself. She began to unwrap the canvases carefully, removing the bubble wrap and checking that none had suffered any damage during transport. She was so focused that she didn't notice when the photographer approached. "Excuse me for interrupting." "Thomas Miller, pleasure to meet you. May I take some photos of the setup process?" His voice was deep and calm. Marianne looked up and could finally see him without his sunglasses. He had deep brown eyes, slightly disheveled dark hair, and a gentle smile that immediately put her at ease. "Of course, no problem. I'm Marianne Smith. I know who you are. I saw your portfolio when Mr. Augustus gave me the list of selected artists. Your work is exceptional." She felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to direct compliments, especially from someone who clearly had experience and knowledge in the artistic field. "Thank you. You said you're doing a feature for a magazine?" "Yes, British Art and Culture. It's a quarterly publication, but it has a very engaged readership. The idea is to show how the local art scene is flourishing, especially here in the southeast." Thomas began to photograph as they talked. They weren't prepared poses, but genuine moments. Marianne unwrapping a canvas, holding a painting against the light to check the colors, adjusting the easel. She tried to ignore the camera and concentrate on her work, but it was impossible not to be constantly aware of his presence. "Have you always wanted to be an artist?" Thomas asked as he changed a lens. "Ever since I can remember. My mother used to take me to the Brighton Open Market when I was a child. While she bought ingredients for the week, I would observe the colors, the textures, the people. I think that's where I developed my eye." "And does she support your career?" Marianne hesitated. Her relationship with her mother was complicated, full of nuances she wasn't sure she should share with a stranger, no matter how friendly he was. "She has her own way of supporting me. It's not always with words, but I know she's proud of me." Thomas nodded as if he perfectly understood what she meant. They continued talking as Marianne positioned the canvases. She discovered that he was from Bristol, had studied photography in Edinburgh, and had returned to the UK 5 years ago with the goal of documenting the country's cultural diversity. "I think art isn't just about beauty," Thomas said, as he examined one of Marianne's paintings more closely. "It's about truth, and your works have a lot of truth in them." It was Marianne's turn to observe him more closely. There was something in the way he spoke, a sincerity that seemed rare these days. Most people she knew in the art world were full of themselves, always trying to impress or belittle others. Thomas seemed different. The rest of the morning passed quickly. By 11 o'clock, all the artworks were positioned and the lighting adjusted. Mr. Augustus walked through the gallery, making final adjustments, moving a painting half a centimeter to the left here, asking for another to be raised a few millimeters there. He was a perfectionist, but Marianne appreciated that. Perfect. The opening. "Here's at 7 in the evening. I suggest all artists arrive at least half an hour beforehand." Marianne thanked him and was about to leave when Thomas called out to her. "Hey, have you had lunch yet?" "Not yet. Why?" "I know an amazing place nearby. Fish stew that will change your life. May I treat you?" "I promise I won't be taking photos the whole time," she laughed. There was something comforting about his company, an ease she rarely felt with people she had just met. "All right, but only if you promise not to make me talk about art. The whole time. I need to switch off a bit before tonight." "Deal." They walked to a small, cozy restaurant 3 blocks from the gallery. The walls were decorated with old Portuguese tiles and black and white photographs of Brighton from decades ago. The smell coming from the kitchen was mouth-watering. They sat at a table near the window. Thomas ordered the fish stew for 2 and fresh cashew juice. While they waited, they talked about everything but art. They discovered they both loved old Brazilian music, were afraid of heights and believed in destiny but not horoscopes. "Do you have family?" "Here in Brighton," Thomas asked as he savored the first piece of fish. "I have my mother and my sister. Julia is older, has 2 children and works as a teacher. And you?" "My parents still live in Bristol. I have a younger brother who's an engineer and thinks I'm crazy for choosing art as a profession." Marianne smiled, completely identifying with the situation. "My sister thinks similarly. She doesn't understand why I didn't get a stable job with a signed contract and health insurance. And why didn't you? Because it would kill me inside. I know it sounds dramatic, but it's true. I can't see myself doing anything else. Thomas watched her with an intensity that made her look away. There was something in that moment, a connection that went beyond a simple conversation between acquaintances. Marianne felt her heart race and tried to concentrate on her food. After lunch, he insisted on paying the bill, despite her protests. They walked back down the street, the midday sun shining brightly above their heads. Brighton seemed to pulse with life around them, vendors shouting their offers, children running, music playing from an open window. "May I give you a ride?" "Home?" Thomas offered when they reached the parking lot. "Thanks, but I came in my sister's car. Then I'll see you tonight. And Marianne, don't be nervous. Your work is wonderful. People will love it." She thanked him and got into the car, watching in the rearview mirror as he walked towards his own vehicle. There was something about that man that made her restless, but in a good way, as if something important was about to happen. She arrived home shortly after noon. The apartment was too silent, amplifying all her anxious thoughts. She tried to rest, but it was impossible to relax. She took a long bath, chose and changed clothes 5 times, redid her makeup 3 times. Nothing seemed right. At 6 in the evening, her phone rang. It was Julia. "Mary, I'm sorry, but I won't be able to make it today. Peter has a fever and I don't want to leave him." Marianne felt a pang of disappointment, but she understood. Her nephew came first. "It's all right, Ju. Give him a kiss for me. I'll tell you how it went later." "And Mom? Is she coming?" "I don't know. She hasn't confirmed." Typical of Mrs. Constance, Marianne thought. Her mother had a habit of showing up or not showing up without warning, following some logic of her own that no one could decipher. At 6:30, finally wearing a yellow dress she had bought especially for the occasion, Marianne left home. Traffic was awful, typical of a Saturday night in Brighton. She arrived at the gallery 10 minutes before 7, already seeing the movement of people entering. Her heart was beating so fast, she thought everyone could hear it. She took a deep breath, checked one last time that everything was in order, and walked towards the entrance. Today her life could change forever, for better or for worse. The gallery was transformed. Soft lights strategically illuminated each artwork, creating dramatic shadows that enhanced textures and colors. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and canapes, while instrumental jazz music played softly in the background. Marianne barely recognized the space where she had been that morning. Mr. Augustus greeted her with a warm nod and introduced her to some important guests: art critics, collectors, other established artists. Marianne tried to memorize names and faces, but everything seemed to pass in a blur. Her hands were sweating and she had to discreetly wipe them on her dress with each handshake. "I saw your works earlier," an elegant white-haired lady commented. "Your approach to Brighton's urbanity is very interesting. There's a palpable melancholy, but also hope." Marianne thanked her, not knowing exactly what to say. She had never thought of her paintings in those terms, but perhaps the woman was right. Thomas appeared a few minutes later, now wearing a navy dress shirt and black trousers. He looked different, more formal, but his smile was the same. "You look beautiful," he said, approaching. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm going to faint at any moment." He chuckled softly. "Normal, but trust me, you'll do great. I've already heard at least 10 people praising your work." Marianne looked around and indeed noticed small groups standing in front of her canvases, gesturing and talking animatedly. Her heart filled with a mixture of pride and terror. The night progressed, and the gallery became increasingly crowded. Marianne circulated among the guests, answering questions about technique, inspiration, creative process. Some people asked genuine questions, others clearly just wanted to sound intelligent. She quickly learned to differentiate. Around 8 o'clock, Mr. Augustus climbed onto a small improvised stage and asked for everyone's attention. The murmur of conversations gradually faded until the gallery was silent. "Good evening, everyone. It is with great satisfaction that I present our exhibition, New Perspectives, Old Roots." These 5 talented Brighton artists represent the future of British art, bringing fresh perspectives on our cultural identity. Each of them will have 2 minutes to speak about their work. We will begin with Marianne Smith. Marianne's heart stopped. No one had mentioned she would have to give a speech. She felt her legs weaken as she walked towards the stage. Thomas gave her an encouraging smile from the back of the gallery. She climbed the 2 steps and stood before the microphone. Dozens of faces looked at her expectantly. She cleared her throat and tried to find her voice. Good evening. I am Marianne Smith, and I grew up here in Brighton, more specifically in the Lanes. My paintings are an attempt to capture the essence of this city beyond the tourist postcards. I wanted to show the Brighton I see every day, the one that works, that struggles, that dreams. Every brushstroke is a tribute to the ordinary people who make this city something extraordinary. She paused, taking a deep breath. And I especially dedicate this exhibition to my mother, Mrs. Constance, who taught me that beauty exists everywhere, if we have the courage to truly look. There was polite applause, and Marianne descended from the stage with shaky legs. She barely paid attention to the speeches of the other artists. Her brain was still processing the fact that she had managed to speak in public without fainting. Thomas approached as soon as he had the chance. It was perfect, sincere and to the point. I thought I was going to throw up. No one noticed. You looked completely confident. Marianne was about to respond when she saw a familiar figure entering the gallery door. Mrs. Constance, wearing her best Sunday dress and a colourful scarf tied around her head, looked around with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. "Excuse me," Marianne said to Thomas and quickly walked towards her mother. "Mom, you came." Mrs. Constance hugged her tightly. "Of course I came, dear. Do you think I'd miss my daughter's first exhibition?" Marianne's eyes welled up with tears. Her relationship with her mother had always been complicated. Mrs. Constance worked hard as a cook in a popular restaurant and never quite understood Marianne's choice of art. For her, art was for rich people, not for girls from the Lanes who needed to work to survive. "Come, I'll show you the paintings." She walked with her mother through the gallery, observing her reactions. Mrs. Constance stopped before each canvas, studying them in silence. When they reached the painting of the woman with her back to the viewer, looking at the sea, she froze. "That's me," she said softly. "Yes, Mom. Do you remember that day we went to Kemptown Beach? You stood still exactly like that for so long that I thought you'd fallen asleep standing up." Mrs. Constance delicately ran her fingers over the frame, without touching the canvas. "I was thinking about your father that day. It had been 10 years since he left." Marianne felt a lump in her throat. They rarely talked about her father, a man who had abandoned the family when she was just 5 years old. The memories were fragmented and painful. "You captured something here, daughter. I can't explain what it is, but it's all here, the pain, the longing, but also the strength to continue even when it seems impossible." It was Mrs. Constance's turn to have tears in her eyes. Mother and daughter hugged right there, in the middle of the crowded gallery, and for a moment nothing else mattered. "Your daughter is very talented," a voice said behind them. They turned and saw a woman of approximately 50, elegantly dressed and holding a glass of wine. She had an air of authority that immediately put Marianne on alert. "Thank you," Mrs. Constance replied with pride in her voice. "I'm Helen Taylor, curator of the Brighton Museum of Art. I'm very impressed with your work, Marianne. I'd like to discuss a possible solo exhibition at our institution." Marianne felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The BMA was one of the most respected institutions in the county. Exhibiting there was any emerging artist's dream. That would be an honor," she managed to say. "Great. I'll leave my card. Get in touch next week, and we'll schedule a meeting to discuss details." Helen handed her an elegant business card and moved away to examine other artworks. Marianne looked at the card in her hands as if it were a magical object. "You see, daughter," Mrs. Constance said, smiling, "I always knew you were special." The rest of the night passed like a dream. More people approached to praise her work. Some even expressed interest in buying pieces. Marianne floated through the gallery in a state of euphoria mixed with disbelief. Around 10 o'clock, Thomas found her again. "May I steal you for a minute? There's something I want to show you." She followed him outside the gallery. The night was pleasant, with a gentle breeze coming from the sea. Thomas led her to a small square across The street, where there were some benches under old trees. I know you must be exhausted, but I needed to get you out of there for a second. You were starting to look a little overwhelmed. Marianne sat on the bench, sighing with relief. Only then did she realize how much her feet hurt and how her head was spinning. It's a lot to process, she admitted. I imagine. But you deserve all this and more. Your talent is real, Marianne. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. She looked at him, trying to understand what was happening between them. She had known this man for less than 12 hours, but she felt a connection she couldn't explain. Why are you being so kind to me? Thomas smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. Because I know how hard it is to believe in yourself when the whole world seems to be telling you to give up. I went through that when I decided to be a photographer. My family thought I was throwing my life away. It took me years to prove them wrong. And now? Now I'm happy. I do what I love and I can make a living from it. It's not always easy, but it's honest. They were silent for a few minutes, just listening to the sounds of the city around them. Cars passing, distant laughter, music coming from a nearby bar. Marianne, can I ask you a personal question? She nodded. What made you paint that woman looking at the sea? There's an intensity in that work that goes beyond technique. Marianne took a deep breath. She rarely talked about it, but something about Thomas made her want to open up. It's my mother, that was one, of the hardest days of my childhood. My father had left exactly 10 years prior, and we went to the beach as a kind of ritual. My sister stayed home with the kids, so it was just me and her. We stayed there all day, hardly talking. When the sun began to set, she stood still like that, looking at the horizon. I thought she was waiting for him to come back, you know, as if somehow he would emerge from the waves. And what happened? Nothing. We simply went home when it got dark. But that image never left me. Her loneliness, the absurd hope, the strength it took to keep living even while carrying all that. Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing what she had told him. You transformed pain into beauty. That's what great artists do. I don't know if I'm a great artist. Not yet, but you will be. There was so much certainty in his voice that Marianne almost believed him. They returned to the gallery shortly after. The party was starting to thin out, but there were still plenty of people circulating. Mr. Augustus approached her with a wide smile. Marianne, 3 people. Have already expressed interest in buying your artworks. We need to discuss prices on Monday. She could barely respond. 3 sales in one night was more than she could have dreamed of. The rest of the exhibition would be on display for a whole month. If she kept up this pace, she might finally be able to leave her job at the gallery and dedicate herself entirely to her own art. Mrs. Constance appeared shortly after, saying she needed to leave. She had to wake up early the next day for work. I'm very proud of you, daughter. Very proud. Indeed. Marianne hugged her tightly, feeling all the love and support that her mother couldn't always express with words. The gallery finally closed at 11 o'clock. Marianne was exhausted, but at the same time too energized to go home and sleep. Thomas offered to walk her to her car. I don't want you walking alone at this hour. They walked through the deserted streets of the neighborhood. The city had a different energy at night, more mysterious, full of possibilities. When they reached the car, Thomas hesitated before speaking. Marianne, I know we just met, but I'd like to keep seeing you. Not just because of the feature, but because I really enjoyed being with you today. Her heart raced. It had been so long since she had felt attracted to someone this way. She had had a few relationships over the years, but none that truly meant something deep. She had always put her art first, leaving little room for romance. I liked it too, she admitted. But I need to be honest. I'm at a very important point in my career, and I don't know if I have room for anything else right now. I understand completely. I'm not asking for anything definitive, just the chance to get to know you better. No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people who enjoy art, good food, and interesting conversations. Marianne smiled. When he put it that way, it seemed simple. All right. But you need to understand that my art will always come first. I wouldn't expect anything different. In fact, that's one of the things I admire most about you. They exchanged numbers and said goodbye with a long hug. Marianne got into the car and sat for a few minutes before starting the engine, processing everything that had happened on that extraordinary day. Her life was about to change in ways she could barely imagine. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Marianne barely had time to breathe between meetings with potential buyers, interviews for art blogs, and planning the exhibition at the BMA. Helen Taylor had proposed a solo show in 3 months, which meant Marianne would need to produce at least 8 new works, in addition to those she already had. Thomas became a constant presence in her life. They met at least 3 times a week, always with the excuse that he needed to photograph her creative process for the feature, but both knew there was something more there. They talked for hours about art, life, dreams. He made her laugh in a way no one else could. One Wednesday afternoon, Marianne was in her studio struggling with a particularly difficult canvas. She wanted to capture the energy of the Brighton Market Hall at dawn, when vendors were setting up their stalls and the city still slept around them. But something wasn't right. The colors were too cold, the composition too rigid. Her phone rang. It was Julia. "Mari, I need to talk to you. Can you come have dinner at my place tonight?" There was something strange in her sister's tone of voice, an urgency that wasn't normal. "Of course, Ju. What time? Is 7 all right?" "Perfect. Is everything okay?" A pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, we just need to talk about something. Bring Mom if you can." Marianne hung up the phone feeling a tightness in her chest. Julia was never this mysterious. Something important was happening. She spent the rest of the afternoon trying to concentrate on her painting, but her mind constantly wandered. Around 5 o'clock, she gave up, cleaned her brushes and went to her mother's house to pick her up. Mrs. Constance lived in an old terraced house in the Lanes, the same one where the girls had grown up. The house had peeling walls and a garden that looked more like a jungle, but it was full of memories and love. Marianne still had the key and entered without knocking. "Mom, I'm here!" Mrs. Constance appeared from the kitchen with her hands full of flour. She was preparing tapioca crepes, one of Marianne's favorite sweets. "Good to see you, daughter. Try this and tell me if it's sweet enough." Marianne tasted the sweet and smiled. "It's perfect, but Mom, Julia invited us for dinner. We need to go soon." "Julia?" "She didn't say anything to me." "Did something happen?" "I don't know. She was strange on the phone. She said she needed to talk to us." Mrs. Constance frowned, worried. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to change. 20 minutes later, they were in the car on their way to Julia's house in Kemptown. Marianne's older sister lived in a simple but cozy house a few blocks from the beach. She was a Portuguese teacher at a public school and raised her 2 children alone after her husband had left 5 years ago. Life wasn't easy, but she always kept a smile on her face and a kind word for everyone. When they arrived, Julia greeted them at the door with an overly long hug. Her hands trembled slightly. The table was already set with a hearty bean and meat stew, the dish they always made on special family occasions. Peter and Luke, 8 and 10 years old respectively, were watching television in the living room, oblivious to the adults. Tension. After dinner, Julia put the boys to bed and returned to the table where Marianne and Mrs. Constance waited anxiously. "So, what's going on?" Mrs. Constance asked, getting straight to the point. Julia took a deep breath, nervously fiddling with a spoon. "Do you remember that test I had at the hospital last month? The doctor called me today with the results." Marianne's heart stopped. She had completely forgotten about the tests. Julia had mentioned she was having some aches and excessive tiredness, but nothing had seemed too serious. "And?" Mrs. Constance asked, her voice tense. "It's benign, thank God. But I have an ovarian tumor that needs to be removed. The surgery is scheduled for 2 weeks from now." The silence that followed was deafening. Marianne felt the world spin around her. Julia had always been the strong one, the one who took care of everyone, the one who never faltered. "But will you be okay?" Marianne managed to ask. "Yes, the doctor said it's a relatively simple surgery, but I'll need a few weeks to recover and won't be able to do any physical exertion for at least a month." "And the children?" Mrs. Constance asked already, thinking practically. "That's why I called you. I'm going to need help. With the boys, with the house, with everything." "Of course we'll help," Marianne said immediately. "I can stay here during your recovery if you need me to." "But what about your exhibition at the BMA?" Julia asked, worried. "I don't want to disrupt your plans. My sister is more important than any exhibition." Mrs. Constance had tears in her eyes, but maintained her composure. "Let's do this. I'll take care of the boys after school. Marianne can come help whenever she can, and you, young lady, will focus only on getting well. No trying to do everything yourself like you always do." Julia finally let the tears fall. "I was so afraid to tell you. I stayed awake all night thinking about how to say it." The three women hugged there in the kitchen, united by the same strength that had always kept that family standing despite all the difficulties. Marianne felt the weight of responsibility fall on her shoulders, but at the same time, a renewed determination. Julia had always been there for her. Now it was her turn to reciprocate. She spent the rest of the night at her sister's house, helping her organize medical papers and make a list of what would be needed during recovery. When she finally returned home, it was almost midnight. She was physically and emotionally exhausted. Thomas called as soon as she entered the apartment, as if he had some sixth sense that she needed to talk. "Hi, did you get home?" "I just did. Is everything okay?" "Your voice sounds strange." Marianne told him everything about Julia, about the surgery, about the fear she felt even though the doctors had said it was treatable. "Do you want me to come over?" Thomas asked without hesitation. "You don't have to. It's late already and you must be tired. Marianne, I want to be there with you. Let me come." 20 minutes later, he was at her apartment door with a grocery bag. He had bought chocolate, ice cream, calming tea, and even some homemade cookies from a 24-hour bakery. "I thought you might need some comfort food," he said with a shy smile. She hugged him tightly, feeling the tears she had held back all night finally fall. Thomas held her in silence, letting her break down. He didn't try to say everything would be okay or offer empty words of comfort. He just stayed there, solid and present. They sat on the sofa, and Marianne ate ice cream straight from the tub as she talked about everything. About the fear of losing her sister, about the guilt of being so focused on her career that she had forgotten about Julia's problems, about the pressure of having to be strong now. "You don't have to be strong all the time," Thomas said gently. "Sometimes it's okay to let yourself feel afraid, but I need to be there for her. I can't fall apart now. Being present doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being there despite the fear." Marianne looked at him, realizing again how he always knew exactly what to say. "How are you so wise?" "I'm not wise. I've just been through difficult things and learned some lessons along the way. Do you want to talk about it?" He hesitated, as if deciding how much to share. "My brother had a serious health problem a few years ago. It was a very difficult period for my family, but he recovered and is doing well today. These things scare us, but often people are stronger than we imagine." Marianne nodded, feeling a little more hopeful. Thomas stayed until she fell asleep on the sofa, covered her with a blanket, and silently left, locking the door from the outside and leaving the keys in the mailbox. The following days were a race against time. Marianne tried to balance her work on the new paintings with visits to Julia and helping Mrs. Constance organize everything for the post-surgical period. Thomas became a crucial support, often showing up with food or simply staying silently in the studio while she painted. Raphael called from London when he heard the news. "Mary, I can come over if you need me to. I can take a few days off. You don't have to, Rafa. But thanks for offering. How's the exhibition at the BMA going?" Marianne sighed. "Honestly, I'm behind schedule. I have 4 canvases ready, but I need at least 4 more and I can't concentrate. Do you want me to talk to Helen? Maybe she can postpone it a bit." "No, I don't want to seem unprofessional. I'll manage." But it was getting increasingly difficult. Every time she sat before the canvas, her mind wandered to Julia, to the approaching surgery, to all the possible bad scenarios that could happen. A week before the surgery, Marianne had a complete breakdown in the studio. She was trying to paint a capoeira scene on the beach, but nothing was coming out as she wanted. Frustrated, she threw her paintbrush against the wall and started to cry uncontrollably. Thomas, who had arrived a few minutes earlier, pulled her into a hug. "That's enough, Marie. You need to stop and breathe. But I can't stop. The exhibition is in 2 months and I still have so much work. And do you think you'll be able to paint anything good in this state? Art doesn't come from a place of despair, it comes from a place of truth. And right now your truth is fear. So paint that. Marianne looked at him, confused. Paint the fear. Paint the anxiety. Paint what you're feeling now. Stop trying to create what you think you should create and create what's really inside you. She had never thought of that. She always tried to control her emotions when painting, channeling them in an organized way. But maybe Thomas was right. Maybe it was time to let the mess out. She grabbed a clean canvas and started painting without much thought. Quick, aggressive brushstrokes, dark colors mixed with explosions of red and yellow. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't technical, but it was honest. It was everything she felt at that moment put onto the canvas. She painted for hours, completely losing track of time. Thomas stayed there, observing in silence, occasionally taking a few photos. When she finally stopped, exhausted, she looked at what she had created. It was chaotic, but there was an undeniable energy there. A fragmented woman in the center, pieces of her scattering in different directions, but in the heart of the figure a small but intense light. It's about fragmentation, Marianne said aloud, understanding her own work as she observed it. About how we feel divided into 1,000 pieces when life gets difficult. But there's always a core that remains intact. Thomas approached the canvas. It's your strongest work yet. You should include this one in the exhibition. She wasn't sure, but she kept the canvas anyway. Maybe he was right. Sometimes you had to stop trying to control everything and simply let the art happen. The day of Julia's surgery dawned grey and rainy. Marianne had barely slept, spending the entire night tossing and turning in bed, alternating between trying to pray, though she wasn't very religious, and imagining all possible negative outcomes. At 5 in the morning she gave up trying to sleep and went to make coffee. Mrs. Constance arrived early, carrying rosary beads in her hands and an expression of determination on her face. Together they went to pick up Julia, who was already ready. Wearing comfortable clothes and carrying a small backpack with her belongings for the hospital. The older sister was surprisingly calm, calmer than Marianne and their mother. In the car on the way to the hospital, she even joked about finally having an excuse to take a few days off work. I always wanted to know what it's like not to have to wake up at 5 in the morning to prepare lessons. Julia, don't talk like that, Mrs. Constance reprimanded, but there were tears in her eyes. St. Jude's Hospital was located in an upscale area of the city. It was a modern building with white walls and a lot of glass. The reception staff were efficient and kind, processing Julia's admission quickly. They were directed to the room where she would stay, a small but clean space with a window overlooking the sea. The surgeon, Dr. Robert Davies, appeared shortly after to explain the procedure once more. He was a man of approximately 60, with grey hair and a paternal air that immediately reassured everyone. The surgery should last between 2 and 3 hours. It's a procedure we perform routinely, and the success rate is very high. Julia will be in recovery for a few hours after the surgery and will then be brought back to her room. And the risks? Marianne needed to ask. As with any surgery, there's always a small risk of complications related to anesthesia or bleeding, but I emphasize that it's small. Julia is young and healthy. I see no reason for excessive concern. The doctor's words helped, but didn't completely eliminate the knot in Marianne's stomach. Around 7:30, nurses came to get Julia. She hugged her mother and sister, whispering words of love and reassurance. I'll see you soon. And Marie, please finish those paintings. I want to be at the opening of your exhibition at the BMA. You certainly will be, Marianne promised, squeezing her sister's hand. And then Julia was gone, her bed being pushed down the corridor until it disappeared through a double door marked surgical ward. Marianne and Mrs. Constance stood there for a long moment, feeling completely helpless. The waiting room was full of other families in similar situations, all with the same expression of thinly disguised anxiety. Marianne tried to distract herself by fiddling with her phone, but she couldn't concentrate on anything. Mrs. Constance prayed softly, her fingers sliding over the rosary beads. Thomas appeared around 9 o'clock, bringing fresh coffee, And warm cheese bread. I thought you might need this." Marianne hugged him gratefully. His presence was a comfort she didn't know she needed so much. "Thank you for coming." "You didn't have to. I wanted to come. Besides, do you really think I'd be able to work today knowing you were here going through this?" Raphael called from London, asking for constant updates. Mr. Augustus sent a message offering all necessary support and saying she didn't need to worry about anything related to the gallery. Helen Taylor also got in touch, saying they could postpone the exhibition if necessary. But Marianne didn't want to postpone. The exhibition at the BMA was too important, and besides, Julia had made it clear that she wanted her to keep working. It would be disrespectful to give up now. The hours dragged on. Each minute seemed to last an eternity. Mrs. Constance alternated between praying and pacing nervously around the room. Thomas remained by Marianne's side, holding her hand, offering his silent strength. At 11 o'clock, Dr. Robert Davies finally appeared, still wearing his surgical gown. Marianne and Mrs. Constance jumped to their feet. Everything went perfectly. We were able to remove the tumor completely, and there were no signs of any complications. Julia is in recovery and should wake up from the anesthesia soon. You'll be able to see her in about an hour. The relief was so intense that Marianne felt her legs weaken. Thomas held her as she began to cry, all the accumulated tension finally being released. Mrs. Constance also cried, but these were tears of gratitude now. "Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much." When they finally got to see Julia, she was pale and a little groggy from the effects of the anesthesia, but she smiled weakly. "Hello, family. I'm alive." "Nonsense," Mrs. Constance said, but her voice trembled. "Of course you're alive, and you'll stay that way for many, many years." Marianne held her sister's hand, feeling the warmth and firm pulse. Everything was all right. Julia was all right. The recovery was harder than they expected. Julia needed help with practically everything in the first few weeks, and the frustration of being so dependent sometimes made her irritable. But Marianne and Mrs. Constance took turns caring for her and the boys, creating a routine that, though tiring, worked. Marianne returned to painting with renewed intensity. Something had changed in her after Julia's surgery. She understood viscerally how fragile and precious life was, how there was no time to waste on doubts or fears. Her new works reflected this urgency, a raw and honest energy that wasn't present in previous works. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the surgery, Thomas visited her in the studio. She was working on a painting of Mrs. Constance cooking, something she had sketched years ago, but never completed. "That's beautiful," he commented, observing the warm colors and the way the light streamed through the painted window, illuminating the matriarch's face. "It's about gratitude, about realizing that the people we love won't be here forever, and we need to celebrate them while we can." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Mari, can I tell you something?" "Of course." He sat on a paint-stained stool, his hands clasped. "When I said my brother had a health problem, I didn't tell you the whole story. He had leukemia 6 years ago. He went through intensive treatment. It was a horrible time for all of us." Marianne stopped painting and turned completely to him. "Thomas, I'm so sorry. You didn't have to hide that. I didn't. Exactly hide it. I just wasn't ready to talk about it. But after seeing you take care of Julia, I realized you would understand. That period completely changed my perspective on life. That's when I decided to quit the secure job I had in Edinburgh and return to the UK to do what I truly loved. And your brother? He's been in remission for 4 years. He lives a completely normal life now. But the experience taught me that we can't postpone our dreams waiting for the perfect moment, because the perfect moment doesn't exist." Marianne approached and hugged him. "Thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for making me feel like I can share." They hugged for a long moment, and Marianne realized that what she felt for Thomas had evolved into something much deeper than attraction or friendship. She was falling in love with him for the way he understood her art, for the kindness with which he treated people, for the silent strength he offered in difficult times. That night, after Julia and Thomas had left, Marianne picked up one of the wooden sculptures her father had made. It was the bird, so delicately crafted, that it looked like it could fly at any moment. She placed it on the shelf next to her own creations. Perhaps art was something that ran in the family. Perhaps that talent with her hands, that need to create beauty, was something her father had passed on to her. It was a strange and complicated connection, but it was a connection. She called Mrs. Constance. "Mum, I think you should see the things he left. I don't know if I'm ready." "You don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "All right. Tomorrow. Tomorrow." Mrs. Constance's visit the next day was laden with emotion. She held each sculpture with trembling hands, looked at each photo with silent tears streaming down her face. When she read the letter, she had to sit down. "He was always good with his hands," she finally said. "He used to make small wooden toys for you when you were babies." "I had forgotten about that." "Why do you think he left, Mom?" Mrs. Constance sighed deeply. "I think he felt trapped, not by us specifically, but by life. He had big dreams. He wanted to travel, to see the world. But then he had daughters very young. He had to work jobs he hated to support the family. He never complained directly, but I saw the restlessness in him. One day, he simply couldn't take it anymore and left." "Have you forgiven him?" "Part of me has. Another part is still hurt." "I think it's possible to feel both at the same time." Mrs. Constance picked up the wooden picture frame. "Can I keep this one?" "Of course, Mum. All of this is yours as much as it is ours." Marianne spent the following days in a state of deep reflection. The revelation about her father, combined with Julia's recovery and her growing feelings for Thomas, left her emotionally exposed. But from this vulnerability emerged a new creative energy. She painted frantically, channeling all those complex emotions onto her canvases. An entire series about family, loss, forgiveness, and continuity. They were her most personal and honest works to date. Helen Taylor visited the studio to check on her progress and was impressed. "Marianne, these new paintings are exceptional. There's an emotional depth here that will resonate strongly with people. I think we have more than enough material for the exhibition." The opening date was confirmed, 3 weeks from then. It would be the most important event of Marianne's career so far, and she was simultaneously terrified and excited. The weeks before the exhibition passed in a blur of frantic activity. Marianne worked late every night, adjusting final details on the paintings, coordinating with Helen on the curation and space, dealing with local media interviews. Raphael returned from London a week before the opening, bringing with him a contagious energy and the unconditional support he had always offered. On Thursday night, a week before the grand opening, the group was gathered at Marianne's apartment. Raphael, Thomas, Julia, who was almost fully recovered, and Marianne herself. They ate pizza and drank wine, trying to relax a bit before the final intensity of preparation. "I can't believe it's real," Marianne said, looking at the photos of the artworks already installed at the BMA that Helen had sent. "My work on the walls of the Brighton Museum of Art. It feels like a dream." "It's because you're amazing," Raphael replied, raising his glass. "A toast to my best friend, the future star of British art." Everyone toasted, but Marianne noticed that Thomas was quieter than usual. He smiled and participated in the conversation, but there was something different in his eyes, a distance that worried her. After Julia and Raphael had left, she confronted him. "Is everything okay? You seem distant today." Thomas hesitated, clearly struggling with something internally. "I'm fine. Just thinking about a few things. Do you want to talk about it?" He took a deep breath and pulled her to sit on the sofa beside him. "Mari, there's something I need to tell you. I should have told you sooner, but it never seemed like the right time. And now with the exhibition coming up, I don't want this to distract you, but I also can't keep hiding it." Marianne's heart raced. From the seriousness in his tone, she knew it was something important. "Tell me. You're scaring me." "I received a job offer. An international photography magazine wants me to do a documentary series about indigenous cultures in Latin America. It would be a year-long project, traveling through several countries." Marianne felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "A year?" "Yes. It's the opportunity of my career. You know? The kind of thing photographers dream of their whole lives. But it also means being away from here, away from you, When do you have to give an answer? In 2 weeks. Exactly when the exhibition ends, Marianne thought. The universe had a cruel sense of timing. And what do you want to do? That's the question. Before I met you, I would have accepted without a second thought. But now, I don't know. What we're building here, what I feel for you, is important. But this chance might not come again. Marianne felt tears burning her eyes, but forced herself to keep them in check. It wasn't fair to put his decision on her shoulders. It wasn't fair to ask him to choose between her and his dream when she herself would never make that choice. You need to accept. Mari, it's not that simple. It is. Thomas, you once told me that we can't postpone our dreams waiting for the perfect moment. This is your chance. You have to go. And us? She smiled through the tears that were now falling freely. We'll find out. Maybe it will be the end. Maybe you'll come back and things won't be the same. But if I ask you to stay and you give up this opportunity for me, you'll eventually hate me. Or worse, you'll hate yourself. And I don't want that. Thomas pulled her into a tight hug. How are you so mature? So generous? I'm not. I'm dying inside right now. But I know it's the right thing to do. They hugged for a long time, both knowing that something fundamental had changed between them. It wasn't an end necessarily, but it was the beginning of something different, more uncertain. When Thomas left that night, Marianne finally allowed herself to break down. She cried until she had no more tears, all the accumulated emotion of the past weeks finally finding release. Julia's surgery, the revelation about her father, and now this. It felt like the universe was testing how much she could bear. She called Raphael at 2 in the morning. He answered sleepily but was immediately alert when he realized she was crying. Mari, what happened? She told him everything about Thomas, about the job offer, about how she had told him he should go despite desperately wanting him to stay. You did the right thing, Raphael said gently. But that doesn't make it any less painful. Why is it so hard? Why can't I just be happy without something coming to ruin everything? Because life is complicated. Because the people we love have their own lives and dreams. But hey, he hasn't left yet. You still have time, 2 weeks. He leaves 2 weeks after the exhibition. Then enjoy those 2 weeks. Make memories. And then, you deal with whatever comes next. Raphael was right, as always. Marianne decided she wasn't going to waste the time they still had together with sadness and worry. About the future. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. During the day, she was focused on the final preparations for the exhibition. At night, she spent time with Thomas, making sure to savor every moment. They went to the beach, had dinner at their favorite restaurants, stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. On the eve of the opening, Marianne was at the BMA supervising the final adjustments. Helen had done an incredible job with the curation. The artworks were arranged in a way that told a story, starting with the older urban paintings, moving through works about family and identity, and culminating in the most recent paintings about loss and renewal. This is perfect, Marianne said, admiring the space. It's exactly how I imagined it. You should be proud. It's a powerful exhibition, Marianne. The people will connect deeply with your work. That night, Marianne could barely sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, alternating between excitement and pure terror. What if no one showed up? What if people hated the work? What if the whole exhibition was a monumental failure? At 6 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep and went for a walk on the beach. The sun was rising over the ocean, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. Brighton was slowly waking up around her. Vendors setting up their stalls, fishermen returning with the morning's catch, surfers catching the first waves. She thought of everything she had been through to get there. The sleepless nights painting, the temporary jobs to pay the bills, the constant doubts about whether she was making the right choice. She thought of her mother working hard to raise 2 daughters alone, of Julia overcoming health challenges with grace and strength, of Raphael abandoning a promising career in London to return home, of Thomas who would soon leave to pursue his own dream. Everyone was making difficult choices. Everyone was trying to balance love and ambition, roots and wings. There was no right answer. All they could do was make the best possible decisions with the information they had and trust that things would work out. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Mrs. Constance. "I'm so proud of you, my daughter. Your grandmother would be proud too. Today you show the world the talent we always knew you had. I love you." Marianne smiled through her tears. She replied quickly and went home to get ready. Today was the day. For better or worse, her life was about to change again. She chose a simple but elegant dark blue dress that made her eyes sparkle. She tied her hair into a low bun and put on the earrings Julia had given her for her birthday. She looked at herself in the mirror and for a moment didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked confident, powerful, exactly the kind of artist she had always wanted to be. Raphael arrived at 4 to give her a ride. He himself was impeccable, wearing a grey suit and a tie that Marianne suspected had been specially bought for the occasion. "Ready for your big night?" "More ready than I'll ever be." Traffic was awful as always, but they arrived at the BMA with plenty of time. Helen was already there, coordinating the events team. Waiters circulated preparing trays, a string quartet tuned their instruments in a corner, photographers tested their equipment. "Marianne, you look beautiful," Helen exclaimed upon seeing her. "Come, I want to show you one last thing." She led her to the main entrance of the exhibition. There was a large sign with her name and the title of the show, Roots and Wings, A Journey Through Brighton's Identity. Below it, her photo and a brief biography. It was real. All of it was real. Guests began to arrive at 7. First a trickle, then a constant flow. Art critics, collectors, other artists, journalists, ordinary people who loved art. The space became increasingly crowded. Mrs. Constance arrived with Julia and the boys. The matriarch wore her best dress and had tears of pride in her eyes from the moment she entered. Her grandsons ran excitedly among the people, marveling at the space and all the pomp. Thomas arrived last, carrying his camera as always. But this time, after taking some official photos, he put it away and simply stood beside Marianne, his silent and constant support. Helen climbed onto a small stage and asked for everyone's attention. "Good evening. It is an honor to present to you Roots and Wings, Marianne Smith's first solo exhibition here at the Brighton Museum of Art. Marianne is an exceptional artist who captures the essence of our culture with brutal honesty and moving beauty. Her works speak of identity, family, loss and hope in a way that resonates universally. Please give a warm welcome to Marianne Smith." The applause was deafening. Marianne climbed onto the stage with shaky legs, looked at the crowd of hopeful faces, and began to speak. "Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank the Brighton Museum of Art and especially Helen for believing in my work. I want to thank my family, my mother Constance, and my sister Julia, who always supported me even when my dreams seemed impossible. And I want to dedicate this exhibition to all the people who make Brighton what it is. Those who wake before the sun, those who work until their hands hurt, those who dance even when they're tired, those who dream even when life says they shouldn't. You are my inspiration. You are my art. Thank you." She descended from the stage to more applause. People stopped her to compliment her, to ask questions, to express how the artworks had touched them. It was everything she could have hoped for, and more. But in the midst of all that joy and celebration, Marianne couldn't stop thinking that in 2 weeks Thomas would be leaving. The exhibition was an absolute success. In the first 3 days, over 1,000 people visited the BMA to see Marianne's work. Reviews were extremely positive, with several newspapers and art blogs highlighting her innovative technique and emotional depth. 4 artworks were sold in the first week, for prices Marianne had never imagined receiving for her work. But amidst all this glory, she couldn't shake off the melancholy that accompanied her. Thomas's deadline was approaching. He had officially accepted the job offer and was already making preparations for the trip. He would leave the following Saturday, exactly 15 days after the exhibition opened. Raphael noticed her state of mind during breakfast on Wednesday. "You should be on cloud 9 right now, Mari. Why are you so sad?" She stirred her coffee without actually drinking it. "It's Thomas. He's leaving in 3 days. And are you thinking of asking him to stay? I already told him he should go. It would be selfish to change my mind now." Raphael took her hand across the table. "Marie, can I ask you a direct question? Are you in love with him?" She didn't answer immediately, but the answer was clear in her eyes. "Yes, I think so." "And do you think he feels the same way about you?" Marianne thought of all the little things Thomas had done, the way he looked at her, how he was always there when she needed him, how he understood her in a way no one else could. "I think so." "Then you need to tell him before he leaves, but that won't change anything. He still needs to go. Maybe not. But at least you two will know where you stand. Maybe you can find a way to make it work, long distance. Or, maybe not, but you'll regret it forever if you don't speak up." Marianne knew Raphael was right, but fear paralyzed her. What if she confessed her feelings and Thomas said he didn't feel the same way? Or worse, what if he did feel the same, but it made the departure even more painful? She spent the next 2 days avoiding Thomas under the pretext of being busy with the exhibition. He tried to call several times, but she always found excuses not to answer. She knew she was being cowardly, but she couldn't help it. On Friday night, the eve of his departure, Thomas showed up unannounced at her apartment. He knocked insistently until she answered. "Why are you avoiding me?" he asked as soon as she opened the door. "I'm not avoiding you." "Yes, you are." "Marie, I'm leaving tomorrow. I don't want our last memories to be like this." She let him in and they sat on the sofa where they had spent so many nights talking. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to deal with this. Me neither. But running away doesn't make it easier." Marianne took a deep breath. It was now or never. Or, "Thomas, I need to tell you something. I know you're leaving tomorrow, and I know it's the right decision for you, but I need you to know that I love you. I don't know when it happened exactly, but it did. And I know this might complicate everything, but I can't let you go without saying it." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "Marie, I love you too, ever since that first day at the gallery. But that's precisely why I need to go. I need to do this, not just for myself but for us. If I stay now, I'll always wonder and resent this lost opportunity, and I don't want that to ruin what we have, so what do we do?" He took her hands. "We try. Long distance is hard, but it's not impossible. A year will pass, and when I come back, if we still feel the same, we'll build something real. No regrets, no resentments. And what if you don't come back? What if you meet someone there or realize you don't feel the same anymore?" Thomas smiled through his tears. "Then at least we will have tried. And we'll have these memories, but Marie, I believe I'll stop loving you. You changed my life. You made me believe it's possible to have a career and love, ambition and connection." They kissed then, a kiss full of promises and goodbyes, of hope and uncertainty. They spent the night together, not sleeping, just talking and holding on to every detail of each other for the months of separation that lay ahead. On Saturday morning, Marianne accompanied him to the airport. Raphael, Julia, and even Mrs. Constance went along. Thomas had become part of the family in those months. At the boarding gate, he hugged each of them. When it was Marianne's turn, he held her for a long moment. "1 year," he whispered. "Wait for me 1 year, I'll be here." And then he was gone, passing through security and disappearing into the terminal. Marianne stood still until she could no longer see him, feeling as if a part of her had gone with him. The following months were simultaneously the most challenging and rewarding of Marianne's life. The exhibition at the BMA continued for another 6 weeks, breaking visitation records. Galleries from other counties began to express interest in her work. She even received invitations to exhibit in London and Edinburgh. Thomas kept in regular contact, sending photos of his trip, calling whenever he had decent internet. But the distance was difficult. There were days when Marianne doubted if they could make it work. But then he would send a message at the exact moment she needed it most, or call late at night just to hear her voice, and she remembered why it was worth waiting. Raphael permanently returned to Brighton and opened his own design studio. He and Marianne returned to their routine of weekly lunches and endless conversations about art and life. Julia was completely recovered and had even started dating a fellow teacher, a kind man who treated her as she deserved. Mrs. Constance finally retired from the restaurant kitchen and began teaching Brighton cooking classes to tourists. She discovered she loved teaching and had a talent for it. For the first time in decades, she seemed truly happy and fulfilled. Marianne continued painting, her work evolving and maturing. She created an entire series inspired by her experience with distance, paintings about connection through separation, about love that transcends geography. These works were the most well-received to date. One day, 8 months after Thomas's departure, Marianne was in the studio when she received a call from an unknown international number. "Hello? Marianne Smith?" A female voice with a foreign accent asked. "Yes, who's speaking?" "My name is Claire Dubois. I'm a curator at Galerie Moderne in Paris. I saw your work during a visit to the UK and I'm very interested in organizing an exhibition of yours here in Paris." Marianne almost dropped the phone. Paris. An exhibition in Paris. That would be an honor, she managed to say. "Great, I need you to come here to discuss the details. Could you come next month?" After hanging up, Marianne was in shock for several minutes. She called Raphael, then Julia, then her mother, all equally excited. Finally, she called Thomas. He answered from a hotel somewhere in Colombia. "Mari, so good to hear from you." She told him about the Paris offer, and she could hear the genuine excitement in his voice. "That's incredible. You have to accept." "I will accept." "But Thomas, I thought of something. You're coming back in 4 months. What if I go to Paris now and stay there until you finish your work? We can meet up in Europe when you're done." "You would do that?" "Of course I would. I want to be with you. And this is also an incredible opportunity for my career. It's perfect." They planned everything on that call. Thomas would finish his documentary series at the end of October. Marianne would go to Paris in June, have 2 months to prepare the exhibition, and then he would travel to meet her. They could spend some time together in Europe before deciding their next step. The news that Marianne would exhibit in Paris spread quickly. The local press covered it extensively, proud of a Brighton artist gaining international recognition. Helen Taylor organized a farewell party at the BMA, bringing together everyone who had supported Marianne throughout her journey. On the night of the party, Marianne looked around the space filled with loved and familiar faces. Mrs. Constance chatting animatedly with other artists, Julia dancing with her children, Raphael making everyone laugh with his stories, Mr. Augustus proudly showing Marianne's first works that were still at the Horizon Gallery. She thought of everything that had happened in the past year, the first exhibition, meeting Thomas, Julia's surgery, the revelation about her father, the painful goodbye at the airport, and now Paris. Her life had completely changed in ways she could never have predicted. But through all the changes, one thing remained constant: her art. It was her anchor, her way of processing the world, her voice when words weren't enough. And finally, the world was listening. On the day of her departure for Paris, the whole family went to the airport. Mrs. Constance cried, but they were tears of pride now, not sadness. Julia hugged her tightly and whispered that she was excited to visit her in Europe. Raphael promised he would go as soon as he could save enough money. Before going through security, Marianne looked back one last time, her family, her roots, waving and smiling, and then she looked forward to the boarding gate, to the unknown, to all the possibilities that awaited her. She remembered the painting she had made months ago, the 2 birds flying together over the sea of Brighton. Roots and wings, she thought. You don't have to choose one or the other. You can have both. She walked through security with a smile on her face and hope in her heart. In 4 months she would be in Thomas's arms again. And until then she would continue doing what she loved, creating art that touched hearts and told stories. Her flight was called and she boarded, leaving Brighton behind but carrying the city in every brushstroke, in every color, in every story she would yet tell. 4 months later, on the day her exhibition in Paris opened to critical acclaim, Marianne was standing in front of the gallery when she saw a familiar figure walking down the pavement. Thomas, tanned and with longer hair than when he left, smiled upon seeing her. She ran to him and threw herself into his arms. "You came, I promised I would. And besides, I wouldn't miss the opening of your exhibition for anything in the world." They entered the gallery hand in hand. The walls were covered with Marianne's work, each painting telling a part of her journey. There were works about Brighton, about family, about loss and love and hope. And there, on the main wall, the painting of the two birds flying together over the sea. Thomas stopped before it. "It's about us, isn't it?" It always was. He pulled her into a kiss right there, in the middle of the gallery full of elegant strangers and sophisticated art critics. And Marianne realized she finally had everything she had always wanted. Her art being recognized, her family supporting her from a distance, and the man she loved by her side. She didn't know what the future held. Maybe they would stay in Paris, maybe they would return to Brighton, maybe they would travel the world together. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were together, both pursuing their dreams, both supporting each other. Roots and wings. She had both now, and she was ready to fly as high as possible, knowing she would always have a place to return to. Months later, when they returned to Brighton for a visit, Marianne organized a small exhibition at the Horizon Gallery with the works she had created in Paris. The city welcomed her as a local hero, the girl from the lanes who conquered Europe. On opening night, with all her family present, Marianne gave a short speech. "Brighton will always be my home. It's here that I learned to see beauty in the ordinary, strength in adversity, hope in difficulty. I carry this city with me wherever I go, in every brushstroke, in every color choice. And no matter how far I travel, I will always return to these roots, because they give me the wings I need to fly." The applause was deafening. Mrs. Constance wept openly with pride. Julia smiled radiantly beside her boyfriend and children. Raphael shouted exaggerated cheers. And Thomas, her Thomas, was there beside her, solid and present as always. That night, after everyone had left and the gallery was silent, Marianne and Thomas were alone among the paintings. He pulled her close and whispered, "Marry me?" She looked at him, surprised but not surprised at the same time. She felt they had been heading in this direction for months, but hearing the words aloud still took her breath away. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. They kissed, surrounded by art, love, and all the possibilities the future held. Marianne thought of her mother, who loved and lost but never gave up. She thought of Julia, who faced challenges with grace and strength. She thought of her father, who made mistakes but tried to make amends in the end. She thought of all the people who had helped her along the way, and she understood that her story wasn't just hers. It was the story of everyone who loved her, everyone who believed in her, everyone who taught her what it meant to be strong and kind and brave. It was the story of Brighton, of Sussex, of the UK, of all the ordinary people doing extraordinary things every day. Her art was a celebration of that, and she would continue painting, telling these stories, honoring these lives, as long as she had breath in her lungs and paint on her brushes. A year later, Marianne and Thomas got married, on Kemptown Beach, in the same spot where Mrs. Constance had stood looking out at the sea so many years ago. It was a beautiful day, with bright sunshine and a gentle breeze. The ceremony was simple but moving, with only family and closest friends. As they exchanged their vows, Marianne looked into Thomas's eyes and saw their future. It wasn't a future without challenges or difficulties, but it was a future they would face together. With firm roots and strong wings, they were ready for anything life brought. And as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky, with shades of orange, pink and purple that no artist could perfectly replicate, Marianne Smith knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, home, loved, fulfilled, and ready for the next chapter of her extraordinary journey. Dear listeners, we hope Marianne's story has touched your hearts. This journey about chasing dreams, valuing family, and finding the courage to fly reminds us that we can have deep roots and still take great flights. If this narrative resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the inspiring stories we prepare. Leave your like on this video and tell us in the comments which part of Marianne's story moved you the most. Was it her relationship with her mother, Julia's triumph, the romance with Thomas? We want to know. Every day we bring new stories that celebrate human strength, love and determination. Your participation in the comments helps create a community of people who believe in the power of good stories. Until the next story, and remember, we all have roots that sustain us and wings that allow us to fly. You just need the courage to use both.